The hum of the overhead fluorescent light didn't just change pitch, it curdled. You're standing there, mid-sentence, or mid-thought, and suddenly the yellow tint of the room starts to bleed into a bruised violet that no one else sees. Your left ear begins that specific high-frequency whistle, the one that sounds less like sound and more like the pressurized hiss of a diving bell. You aren't losing your mind. You're finally catching up to the glitch. The air in the room just moved a half second ahead of the moment you're actually inhabiting, leaving you standing in a vacuum of now, while the physical world leans aggressively toward a next that feels entirely fraudulent. It's a visceral, leaden pull in the center of your chest, a sudden awareness that the floor isn't just wood or concrete, but a thin membrane stretched over something infinitely deep and cold. Everything around you, the people, the furniture, the certainties, is shouting, convinced of its own direction, while you are experiencing the absolute, terrifying stillness of a compass needle that has finally found a new north. The sound is paths everyone chased felt strangely hollow the moment you got close enough to step on them. Why motivation seems to vanish not when you're tired, but when something feels misaligned. That's not failure. That's filtration. There's a specific pattern I've been observing for a long time now. It doesn't announce itself with miracles or grand visions. It shows up in the nervous system first, in sensory overload, in the way your body reacts before your beliefs do, in the way refusal comes easier to you than blind acceptance ever did. Some people call it intuition. Others dismiss it as overthinking. Neither quite land. Because this isn't about knowing more. It's about tolerating less. There's a mark tied to this pattern, not as a badge, not as an identity to show off, more like a silent signature your body carries, the kind you only notice after enough moments pile up and start forming a shape. On both palms, the lines don't just wander randomly. They converge. They echo each other. They repeat a form that mirrors how your awareness operates. You didn't choose it. You did from. That's the door. Not the one everyone runs toward. The one that opens based on what you refuse to carry. And the strange thing is how calm it feels once you stop fighting it. There's no adrenaline rush here. No dramatic transformation montage. Just a steadier spine. A clearer internal boundary. A growing trust that you don't need to justify why something doesn't fit anymore. The air feels thick sometimes, like a storm is building without clouds. I don't know where you're listening from, but does it feel heavier there too? Like something is rearranging beneath the surface, asking you to slow down just enough to notice what you're no longer willing to accept. If you're sensing these patterns, don't close this channel. Not because of loyalty. Because synchronization matters when static increases. Stay on this frequency. Let me know what's been falling away in your world lately. The refusals are telling us where the next opening actually is. It didn't start as a realization. It started as texture. That's the part people never talk about. Consciousness doesn't always arrive as insight. Would surface when I was about to agree to something out of habit. A meeting. A plan. A conversation that required me to be someone louder than I felt. The moment I internally hesitated, there it was in the left ear, steady and unapologetic. I didn't know what to do with it at first. I still don't, entirely. But I've learned to notice when it shows up and what usually follows, if I ignore it. That was the first field moment. Not mystical, just undeniable. The second one came through light. Fluorescent light, specifically, started doing something strange to my perception. It flattened depth. Faces felt closer than they should have been. Time stretched in uncomfortable ways. 5 minutes felt like 20, then an hour would disappear without warning. I caught myself blinking more often, like my eyes were trying to recalibrate to a frequency they didn't consent to. I tested it without trying to prove anything. Natural light felt different. Softer. Dimmer. Even when been living at for years without realizing it. You might recognize this in yourself already. Moments where your interest drops off a cliff without warning. Where things you once chased now feel strangely irrelevant. Where you're not depressed, not apathetic, just done carrying what was never yours to begin with. That's not loss of drive. That's drive being rerouted. The mark comes into play here, not as proof, but as echo. Lines forming the same convergence on both hands, mirroring how your internal decisions now happen. Not in debate, not in impulse, in recognition. Your system knows before you argue with it. And lately, you've been arguing less. There's a steadiness growing underneath all of this. A calm that doesn't ask for validation. Power without urgency. Strength without the need to demonstrate it. You're not becoming louder. You're becoming harder to move without consent. And that's only the surface layer. Because once the refusals begin aligning, once the sensory field tightens and stops leaking energy everywhere, something else starts to shift. Time perception bent long time ago is finally catching up to you. Fluorescent light becomes almost unbearable during these moments, not because it's bright, but because it's shallow. It flattens everything into the same frequency. People, objects, intentions. You notice how quickly it drains you, how your focus splinters, how your body wants to leave even if you don't consciously decide to. Meanwhile, softer light slows you down. Depth returns. Your thoughts stop racing and start arranging themselves without force. This is rhythm, correcting itself. I won't pretend I know exactly why the left ear responds the way it does. I don't trust explanations that feel too neat. But I've noticed patterns. The ringing shows up when something is slightly ahead of you in time, like your system caught the echo before the sound fully arrived. It's strongest when you're about to override yourself. When you're seconds away from agreeing to something out of politeness, habit, or old identity. Sometimes it fades the moment you refuse. Sometimes it stays, low and steady, like it's waiting to see if you'll listen this time. And here's where honesty, the more your life starts organizing itself around fewer, cleaner signals. People fall away without conflict. Opportunities dissolve without drama. You stop chasing resolution and start recognizing when something has already resolved itself internally. That's when destiny stops feeling like a destination and starts feeling like a temperature. A steady internal climate you return to no matter where you are physically standing. You're not being pulled forward by hunger. You're being held in place by accuracy. The door everyone talks about isn't ahead of you. It's beside you. It only opens when you stop trying to push through what was never meant to move. And every refusal you've made without applause has been teaching your system exactly how to recognize it when it finally does. Stay here with me a little longer. There's another layer beneath this rhythm. One that explains why solitude feels colder than it should, yet safer. Why distance feels like relief instead of loss. Why your strength has always carried the temperature of metal at dawn. That's where the mark stops being a pattern and starts being weight, settling. Like your system locking into a frequency, it's been orbiting for years but never fully entered. That cold isn't isolation. It's clarity without insulation. People misunderstand this phase because it doesn't look productive. You're not networking. You're not optimizing. You're not broadcasting growth. From the outside, it can look like withdrawal. But internally, something is being forged. Pressure without spectacle. Strength without motion. Metal doesn't harden in heat alone. It hardens through controlled cooling. That's what's happening when you step back without explanation. When you decline invitations that don't feel wrong, but don't feel right either. When you stop filling silence just to prove you belong. Each of those moments lowers the internal temperature, just enough to solidify something that used to stay malleable. Your boundaries stop flexing. And with that comes a different kind of loneliness. One that doesn't ache. One that doesn't beg. One that simply exists, clean and uncompromised. You might still notice it late at night or early in the morning, The absence of voices. You don't move as fast anymore, but you don't capsize either. This is why power doesn't feel exciting here. It feels dependable. You're no longer driven by the need to prove you can endure. You already know you can. What you're learning now is when endurance is unnecessary. When refusal preserves more strength than effort ever could. That's the paradox most people miss. The door you're approaching doesn't respond to desire. It doesn't open for ambition. It responds to what you won't carry anymore. To the weight you've set down without ceremony. To the silence you chose over explanation. And once you understand that, destiny stops feeling like a future event. It starts feeling like pressure released in the present moment. There's one more movement left after this. Not outward. Inward. Then forward in a way that doesn't look like motion at all. Where consolidation happens quietly, and the next phase doesn't announce itself until you're already standing inside it. That's where this settles. Inevitability doesn't feel like momentum. It feels like resistance disappearing. Grows out of this. But it's not sharp. It doesn't lean forward. It doesn't need witnesses. It's the confidence of knowing what you won't do again. Knowing which doors you won't knock on. Even if they're unlocked. Especially if they're unlocked. Because access without alignment is just another form of cost. This is where destiny is often misunderstood. People expect it to feel like a calling, like being pulled towards something grand. But what if it's the opposite? What if destiny feels like subtraction becoming precise enough that only one path remains usable? Not because it's dramatic, but because everything else finally feels inaccurate. You don't chase this path. You stop blocking it. And when you stop blocking it, your life doesn't explode into meaning. It simplifies. Relationships either adapt to your steadiness or fade without conflict. Work reorganizes around fewer, clearer contributions. Your presence becomes less available. The shift isn't a wall. It's a change in the viscosity of your DNA. You feel it first in your teeth, a metallic, copper-like tang that surfaces when you decline a request you would have swallowed a year ago. The world doesn't just observe your change, it attempts to colonize the new silence you've created. Your old personality was a bag of industrial diamonds, hard. Yes, but used solely to grind down the edges of everyone else's jagged lives, so they wouldn't cut themselves on their own reality. You were the abrasive that made their world smooth. Now, you've stopped spinning. You've become the raw stone. And when they try to use you to polish their ego, they realize that you are no longer a tool. You are an obstacle with your own sharp, unforgiving geometry. You notice the colors under the office LED lights shifting toward a bruised purple. It's a sensory overload that lasts exactly 4 seconds, the exact time it takes for a colleague to realize you aren't going to finish their sentence for them. Your social availability used to be an open salt mine. People walked in, took what they needed to preserve their own sense of self, and left you hollowed out. Brick. And you can't wipe up a mess with a brick. You can only build something permanent with it. Some of that may be true, in ways that don't fit into the narrow architecture of language. But what's actually happening is simpler and far more jagged. You stop compensating. You stop being the transformer that takes high-voltage reality and steps it down into a child-safe frequency for the sake of the room. Now, when you speak, you feel a sharp, dry sensation in the back of your throat, like swallowing sand, because the words are no longer greased with the lie of agreeability. No, agreeability. People has it. You stress, because the words are no longer grease, with the lie of grass, agreeability. Ekrest, duress, wall. You used to be the acoustic foam in every room. People would scream their insecurities, their demands, and their chaos at you, and you would absorb the sound. You ensured there was no echo. You made the world quiet for them by muffling yourself. But now, to explain, You want to tell them that your internal compass has simply stopped spinning and finally pointed north, but the moment you open your mouth, the truth dematerializes. How do you tell someone that your system now prioritizes internal coherence over external connection without sounding like a machine? How do you explain that you are no longer willing to set yourself on fire just to keep their hands warm? There is no vocabulary for this that doesn't leave a bruise. So you choose the lesser injury. You say less. And in that silence, the shape of your world begins to crystallize into something cold, clear, and finally, yours. Some relationships thin out naturally. Messages go unanswered a little longer on both sides. Familiar rhythms lose their grip. You notice how many bonds were held together by habit rather than alignment, by proximity rather than choice, by shared history rather than present compatibility. There's grief in recognizing that. Not dramatic grief. No collapse. Just a quiet reckoning. A realization that many rehearsing responses in advance. Not bracing for demands. Not managing impressions. The relief is subtle, but unmistakable. And that relief tells the truth. What's falling away isn't connection. It's noise disguised as belonging. This phase tests your tolerance for being misunderstood. Because the world prefers explanations it can categorize. It's more comfortable with a clear story than with ambiguity. And you, right now, are ambiguous. Your choices don't fit easily into existing scripts. You're not loudly disengaging, not aggressively independent, not visibly struggling. You're simply unavailable for misalignment. That's harder to place. People may push against it unconsciously, asking for clarity you can't give, pressing for commitments that feel premature, framing your neutrality as indecision. Their discomfort leaks out in small ways. Passive comments, subtle guilt, questions disguised as concern. Are you okay? You've been so quiet lately. Finally stops, replaced by a profound, heavy silence that feels like being underwater. This isn't comfortable. It's the sound of tectonic plates finally settling. You've lost the social lubrication that made you easy. You are no longer the oil. You are the stone. You've become less entertaining, less palatable, less like a soft-serve version of a human being. But what you gain is accuracy. In the past, your interactions were a messy spray of birdshot. Now, they are a single clean puncture. When you speak, the words don't float, they land with the dull thud of a lead weight hitting a wooden floor. People begin to respond. Not with the warm, fuzzy glow of affection, but with the cold, sharp light of respect. Respect has a different temperature than affection. Affection is a campfire, it's cozy. But it needs constant feeding, and it creates smoke that stings your eyes. Respect is geothermal heat. It's invisible, it's deep, and it doesn't ask you to do a damn thing to keep it going. Affection demands a constant. Are we okay? Jaw used to ache for hours after a party. The way your skin felt like it was being peeled back by the sheer force of having to be on. You remember the leak, that slow, invisible hemorrhage of your essence that you couldn't stop because you didn't have the skin for it. You have the skin now. It doesn't ask for permission. It simply changes how much of yourself reaches the surface. The world responds by slowing down. It has to. You have changed the speed of the game. Some will call it withdrawal. Some will call it growth. Most will just feel a slight, unexplainable chill when they realize they can no longer use you as a mirror. And that is exactly where you are supposed to be. You're not here to be accessible to everyone. You're here to be accurate. And accuracy always reduces volume. This phase doesn't last forever in this form. It's a transition, not a destination. The field narrows so it can stabilize. Connections thin so they can reorganize. The noise recedes so the signal can hold without distortion. The silence deepens after that realization, and with it comes something unexpected. It isn't the soft, fluffy peace the world promised you. It's orientation. It's the cold, hard alignment of a compass needle finding true north in a room full of magnets. When the instinct to read faces and soften edges finally powers down, your awareness doesn't go blank. It sharpens. Not forward, into the future, but sideways, into the layers of the present you were never meant to perceive. You start to see the flicker rate of reality. Under the persistent hum of the world, you notice a micro-stutter in people's movements, a lag between their social mask and their true intent. Your vision becomes high contrast. The space between people looks denser than the people themselves. It's a sensory weight, like walking through chest-high water. This is the frequency of the non-observer. You've stepped outside the feedback loop. From here, the structure of the social hologram becomes visible. Not metaphorically, structurally. You notice how much of reality depends on being witnessed to keep its shape. It's like an unrendered room in a video game. It only exists because you are order. You are tending to the bones of your soul, not the skin of their ego. And bones do not negotiate. There's a physical sensation that accompanies this phase. It settles low, behind the sternum, like a weight that isn't painful, but undeniably present. Breathing becomes slower, not because you're trying to calm yourself, but because your system no longer needs to accelerate to stay relevant. Time stretches again here. Not dramatically, not enough to frighten you, just enough to notice that moments have thickness. That pauses feel inhabited instead of awkward. That silence between words carries more information than the words themselves ever did. This is bone memory waking up. Not metaphorical ancestry. Not inherited trauma in the poetic sense. Something older and quieter. The memory of restraint encoded in the body long before language existed. Before social contracts. Before approval became a currency. You feel it most clearly when you're alone. Not loneliness, that's different. This is performed through confession rather than presence. You'll notice moments where someone expects you to play your part, laugh at the right time, escalate emotion, validate the narrative. And when you don't, the scene stutters, like a skipped frame in a film. The silence doesn't feel awkward to you. It feels diagnostic. You're watching the script run without its supporting actor. This is where grief surfaces, briefly. Not for people themselves, but for the mask. For how easy it used to be to disappear inside acceptable roles. How comforting it was to dissolve into collective emotion. How warm it felt to be needed, even when that need was a drain. There's a nostalgia for that softness. But it passes. Because softness without structure collapses under pressure. What replaces it is density. Your body feels denser now. Not heavier, but more anchored. Like mass has redistributed inward. Movements become economical. Speech becomes precise. You no longer fill silence instinctively. You let it work. It will feel that instinctively, long before they understand why. That's not your burden to carry anymore. You've stepped out of the observation loop. You are no longer watching the world to see how to be. You are holding a frequency the world must decide whether it can approach. And that decision will reveal everything that comes next.